Hey guys, it's Ryan on Refuge Radio with Grow, Kill, and Adapt. Today we're going to have Ryan Custead join us from Zion Lutheran. And we're going to talk about measuring success. So let's get at it. Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so walk us through. You are the youth ministry director at Zion Lutheran, correct?
Yeah.
So what does that look like?
Well, kind of like 8 different programs at once,
Of course.
sometimes. So in the one sense, I'm working in the kind of old church on the corner, congregational mainline church way, where we have things like a lot of Christian education programs and confirmation with a core group of students. And I do a lot of things like lock-ins. I'm a big believer in outdoor ministries and retreats and summer camp, and a lot of just kind of fun stuff that's a little bit bigger than that. And then we do a lot of kind of external outreach stuff to unchurched kids in the community. And we do that in partnership with the other churches in Hollidaysburg. So it's all kind of that. And then actually at Zion too, and I'm also, I lead the worship band. And doing music stuff too.
Yeah.
And
Jack of all trades. That's what it is. Actually, Ryan, you were one of the first people that I met when we moved here to Altoona. And my favorite thing is that you guys remember me for the one that was fully against lock-ins and all-nighters and all the other stuff. Oh, everybody else is interested in it. Me, I'm like, nope, not at all. So I know that you do crazy stuff like that. I appreciate the heart of it. It's just not for me, So today we're going to unfold a little bit about what does it look like to measure success, right? And I guess my first question is for you, what does that look like? What does measuring success look like?
I think a big thing, and I was just thinking about this recently because it happened that I had a kid come up and talk to me, is kids coming back that you run into that have graduated and left. A good measure of success can be, are they staying involved in a ministry? Are they going to church somewhere? Are they living out their Christian life in any way? And are they excited to tell you about it? Because if they are, it means that you helped plant in them something that was relevant outside of that immediate context at home, and we need that, and that's important. My biggest fear, the opposite of a goal is like somebody coming back and saying, I haven't really been involved at church. I'm not really doing anything like that. Just nothing was as good as it was back home with you guys. If I hear that, they might mean that to be a compliment. Yeah. That's not a compliment. It's like the opposite of what you want. And I think then measuring success too, relationships that the kids have with each other, how do they relate to their peers? Not just kids that are like them, but kids that are different than them. Do you see some kids who are becoming leaders themselves? And relationships, obviously, that I have with the kids, how comfortable are they with, relating to me? But also in a congregation setting like mine, the relationships that the kids have with other adults in the congregation, you know what I mean? Is there good intergenerational stuff happening?
That's good. Yeah, that's good. There's a couple things you mentioned there that I think about quite a bit. I've been in ministry for 12 years, and I felt like the first 6, I didn't ever get the thanks so much from a kid. Yeah. It took a while, I talk about roots and fruits. It takes a long time to see that fruit be to bear off of a tree. And when it does happen, that is a measure of success, that you impacted their life long term, and then they came back and shared that with you. And oftentimes as youth pastors, we don't feel like we get that, or we aren't reminded of that quite a bit. So and I know some of your programs are pretty large. Some of your dance nights after the football games, things that you do for outreach-oriented things, they get large. And then one of the first questions we're always asked, and I don't know if this is for you guys too, but it seems like it's a common one, is how many kids? Right? That's the big question that everybody asks. Well, how big is your youth group? Because if I can not that I say this, if you have 8, well, you don't struggle with the same issues that I do with 150. Sure. No, that's not exactly the case, but oftentimes that's how it comes off. So why do you think that the numbers are such a big deal in measurement of like our Christian ministries, the way that we walk right now?
Well, I think 2 big reasons that come to mind. The first is I think we just live in a very quantitative culture that's very focused on numbers. I think that we are looking for deep meaning in numbers that may not be there. You know, we look for wisdom in numbers, and there is some, but numbers are never going to tell the whole story or provide us everything with what we need to kind of experience this life that we've been given. You know, there's narrative qualities, there's things like that numbers aren't going to capture. And so I think we're just postured in that way by the culture for that to be the first thing we want to know about. And that goes beyond the church. You know, I think that's anywhere. Yeah. Numbers are what drives us.
Yeah, you look at like how many followers we have on Instagram.
Oh yeah, that's true.
You know, how many likes I got, you know, for a post is a big deal.
It is.
And if everything is measured numbers, and that's what we're taught as a society, then of course that's going to be a default, you know?
Yeah.
So I actually find that one of the reasons why is we're looking at short-term goals versus long-term, right? And part of this is that the measurement for somebody to get a snapshot of what's happening is, and maybe it's their answer is like, how crazy is it when you have kids together? So if I have 150 in my youth group, maybe to them it's overwhelmingly crazy and their picture that they build. But it's a short-term way to measure something that has a lot more qualitative versus quantitative data attached to that. Yeah. And in that, I think as far as ministries go, you know, running a program that you have 200 kids at, it could be way less effective than a small group with 7 or 8 kids, correct? So walk me through a little bit of your metrics oriented, the vision for your metrics. You know, you're talking about all the programs that you run, and honestly, like some of it, I'm like, how do you do this? You know, I do not want to do what you are doing, right? But what are the metrics that you measure by as you walk through these different levels, I guess, of your ministry?
Sure. I mean, I think the numbers. One set of numbers that I'm going to track is the outreach stuff, just the outright, like how many kids have walked into our building or walked into a building for a program that we've done in partnership with somebody else. Just that outright big number. And that'll include kids that come to the afterburners, which are after football games, you know, and they're
I got to get that name right. Afterburners. Right. I got it now.
There you go. They, you know, they're experiencing the welcome into the church, and that's what we want from them, just for them to know that they're welcomed and valued there, and having a good time. But that's it. So that's a kid, you know, that's a number that's represented there. But it's important, you know, it's important to know how many kids are we actually interfacing with in one way or another in a year. And then, you know, the other kind of set of numbers is more like the real in-depth, the kids that families might go to the church, that are real involved in the youth group, that are doing the kind of old school kind of Christian education stuff that we do, confirmation program and what, and that number's a lot smaller. And then the third thing, you know, I'm always watching is the intersection between the two, because if we are doing this ministry, outreach ministry, I want those kids that are really involved in the church to feel like this is their ministry too, that they know that it's their church and they play a big role in asserting its relevance in the community. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, and you were sharing a story with me. Actually, I think this is a good crossover for this. Is I share a story about camp, correct? And you ended up getting sucked into being a leader when all the other leaders got to take a little breather. Yeah. But it was still good.
Yeah.
Walk us through that story, because I think this is a good example of that melding of outside, internal, coming together, melding in one place.
So we did we had a snow camp kind of winter retreat thing at the beginning of February, and this was done with it was done synod wide, which is like our conference in my denomination. So you had churches from kind of all over the state a little bit, and it was at our church's summer camp, and a weekend program. A lot of the adult leaders stayed in the retreat center. Kids stayed with some camp staff that came back in the cabins. They needed a couple slots filled in the cabins by adults, and I had said, of course, I'm graciously volunteer. Of course, I'll do that.
Serve first.
I didn't think that I'd actually end up. Of course, I got asked, and I was laying in the bunk at like 2 a.m, and these guys, you know, these teenage guys are still up talking. And I'm thinking, man, I really, you know, want to get some sleep, and I'm listening to their conversation. And I chose, you know, I had a moment where I kind of was like, wait, this is a good opportunity. I'm here for a reason. Like, see this as a blessing, like an inside view into what's happening.
Yeah.
And what it was is, you had about eight boys with class differences, different parts of the state and all the cultural stuff that comes with that. You had racial differences, all these things. And one of the kids was was a kid of ours that I have spent a lot of time with. And to listen to him guide the kind of social interaction between all these guys in a way that made a circle that everybody was on the inside of, and seeing him kind of like from a leadership perspective be aware of that kind of thing happening that other people might not necessarily be aware of, but in watching that, so when somebody drifts off, making sure there's a way to make sure that they're brought back into what's happening. And they were making jokes and laughing and stuff, but then they really started sharing a lot of really deep stuff with each other, and it was kind of a neat moment to see. It was definitely a success moment in that one kid, to see that he took it on himself, I think probably even consciously, to know that he's here with brothers in Christ and wanting to make sure everybody was included. Yeah.
That's great. For me, that's a moment of celebration, not just for something internally that I feel like gives me intrinsic value, but it's also a moment to go and share with that kid, hey, I really appreciated what you did, even if you didn't know that I was listening or you thought I was asleep already. I appreciated it, and that's a big deal. So let me ask you, when you look at your after youth group, your Wednesday night services, you're all done. When you walk out the door, how do you know those nights? We know the nights that we like walk away and we're like, we killed it. And then there are other nights that are like, we did not. Like there's a lot of words you could use, but did not is a nice way to put that. What are the questions and thoughts that kind of go through your mind on that church night, that campus setting moment that will kind of help you align whether or not this was a great night or not?
If I feel like it was successful, the first thing you need to do is stop and say, why was it successful? Because there can be different reasons. Everything that we do might have different, goals. Or we might have, like our Wednesday night thing, we might have been doing service work with American Rescue Workers in Hollidaysburg, or visiting residents at our Lutheran home at Hollidaysburg. In a night like that, the question is, did the kids react? Did they engage with that in a way that it's like, this is an obvious piece of Christian life, not something, did I have to fight them tooth and nail? If it's Bible study and whatnot, I think honestly, at a certain point, you do have to say, like, were they able to pay attention? And if they weren't, that's not always, it's, kids need to be held accountable, and sometimes they need to told to be quiet and listen. But I think as leaders, we have to stop and say, like, what about the way that I was presenting this information didn't give them permission to pay attention? Because it is possible to get a room of teenagers to sit and be quiet and listen and engage with something. But I'm looking at, so if I feel like it was successful, I'm going to look at my preparation. And it's not always about the length of time that you take to prepare for something, because I will take days to prepare for something and really dig into it and find that it wasn't successful. And sometimes I'll head in without much preparation and feel like it was really, really successful. I think the level of delegating is a piece of that too. Like, was I thinking of other leaders in my congregation, other volunteers and stuff? Did I give them a piece to own of this? Because if you can do that, then you're able to think more you're able to, as the person ultimately in charge, to step back and think with more purpose and be more intentional about what you're doing, not just filling slots on the calendar, but thinking like, does this really have a place in what we're trying to accomplish in a 12-month period or whatever it is?
Yeah, that's good. You mentioned your leaders. I think that for me is, did I open up the opportunity for my leaders to use their gifts that night? Mm-hmm. Was there a place that I allowed them to step in and impact a kid's life, spend time with them, share who they were, and not just on a platform where, hey, we have to get the program done, because I'm so good at running the program. Whatever it is, I can come in and come out and do that. But sometimes you have to read the room and find out what the room needs, and that audible inside times in youth ministry, it needs to have leaders that run with that. So for me, a part of measuring that success, yes, I want kids to come to Christ. I want that depth to have that aha moment to happen. But I also am challenged to raise up new leaders and have people that can do what I can't do and do what I can do, both of those on my team. And so for me, a lot of times when I walk away and I find successes, did we give that opportunity to leaders for them to build deeper relationships also? So that's a big measure for me for what a good night looks like. That's what it is, you know? And I know you are a dreamer. You are a visionary. You are somebody that has worked really on how do we connect internally and externally. And so I'm going to ask you first, while you're looking at the success of those things and your heart being reaching outside of just your walls of your church, but connecting to other churches through the ministerium, through the programs that you do in Hollidaysburg, how do you measure, what's the difference in measurement between the internal and the external when you may combine or reach out at like a football game or whatever else it might be?
I think for the external stuff, there's definitely like when you watch these kind of just hangout nights where you just have stuff going on and whatnot, like watching the crowd, and it's like, were the kids who were unchurched, did it look like they were on the sidelines of something they didn't really know how to access, you know?
Yeah.
And it's so like, yeah, maybe they had fun and they were there with each other and stuff, but did they really get integrated into what you were doing? And that's what I want to see with the external stuff. And you have to avoid things like insider language. You have to avoid things like practices and stuff that really outside the church are just going to seem strange and weird, because we do a lot of really strange and weird things.
Absolutely.
You know? Particularly in my tradition where like rituals and stuff are like, you know, these ancient rituals and stuff are a place that's from the outside. It's just like, what in the world is that about? So avoiding things like that for the external stuff, making sure that those kids have been able to interface and access what you're doing. And then for the internal stuff, you know, I want to know, again, I think at a certain point, it's like, I think Christian education is really important. Like, I think that kids are really capable of deep theological thought, and I think it's necessary. And so, like, there is a certain point where it is just like, I think there is information that I want to make sure I have given to them in a way that they're able to process it and then recommunicate it. So a lot of, you know, for internal stuff, I want to know that my kids can talk about their faith. That, you know, if somebody asks them, what do you believe, that they can really give, you know, a clear answer. And that they can even defend it a little bit, you know.
Apologetics.
Like, yeah, sure. Because truth is like, in our culture, like I don't think we really even believe that truth exists, you know? And so as Christians, we're like, no, there is like a unifying truth to the universe that's true for everyone, and this is what we believe it is. So well, I want kids to be able to have processed information, you know, and I'm checking to make sure that the relationship with each other, again, is good relationship with me, some of that more kind of like in-depth stuff.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that you mentioned. One, I believe wholeheartedly that oftentimes we walk kids through youth ministry with one focus or another, and we forget to round out the internals where we can defend our faith and we can serve and we can encourage and we can be a part of the community. And growing all of these pieces as youth ministry is oftentimes hard because it's put on one person's hat, our head, and to wear with multiple hats. But absolutely, a measurement of success would be, how do we grow the depth so it's not just the feeling, right? I felt God at camp, but then when I went home, it hurt. Yeah, because real life hurts. And how do I bring depth to that? So that's something we at Refuge have been walking through this year, is how do we disciple and train up kids that when they make that faith commitment, that we're able to say, this is the reality. This is where we're really going in our lives. And so with that being said, I know that you're a dreamer. I have a ton of questions I could ask you here, but one of the ones I want to talk about is, what does it look like for your own personal dreams or things that God has laid on your heart and said that you are to be a good steward of? How do you know that you're moving forward in those practices? And how do you measure your movement forward?
Well, I think for my church, and a personal goal always, and this is kind of just a driving overall thing for me in ministry, something God's really laid heavily on my heart through my experiences growing up in the Lutheran Church, being in the evangelical church in the Assemblies of God for a little bit, leading worship there, and then coming back to kind of the mainline Lutheran setting is, I'm such a believer in church unity and Jesus's prayer to the Father that they might be one. That drives everything to me, because there are so many divides in the church, and we have so much to offer each other, to teach each other. And, a lot of people will just church unity kind of say, well, those differences, it doesn't really matter. We're all pretty much the same. There are really big differences that are important. And we hurt each other too. And we misunderstand each other. But I always love Jesus's prayer there, because it means, the Father will answer Jesus's prayer. The church is being united. The Holy Spirit is drawing us together in unity, even now when it doesn't look like it, when it doesn't feel like it. Despite our best efforts, those lines are being erased. And I want to be a part of that. I want to be available to help with that however I can. And it is applicable in youth ministry, because it starts with the next generation. I want kids that, I'm not saying, I serve in a Lutheran church. I like that. That's what I might teach kids and stuff. But I want to know that as they move outward, that they're never going to shut themselves off from some kind of ministry or from experiencing God somewhere because of the name on the church door or something like that.
That's good.
And so for me, measuring that is going to be about, on one hand, it's my internal kids, have I encamped them so much in our corner of the church that they're uncomfortable in other settings? And I want them to be, because that's what creates good change. But have I given them the tools to kind of understand their place in the whole church? And then for me, it's has my programming forced me into other people's offices, into other church buildings, into other organizations and stuff, because you can get just kind of stuck in the basic rut of the routine. And I want to be able to say, have I intentionally shaken some things up and done some partnerships and stuff that are feeding that ultimate goal for me?
That's great. Yeah, I think that it's great to celebrate and be in a place where it's going to challenge not only your youth, but yourself, to say, look, I have to emulate what I'm desiring to happen. I can't just say that I want the churches to come together. I want to show that by linking together and being a part of other groups, ministeriums, going to their churches, stepping into their ministries and helping them when they need it. That's a big deal. So I really appreciate that. One last question for you.
Sure.
Tools, man. We gotta equip people with tools, right? I think it's important that we give them something they can walk away with. So give me a couple tools that you have found as you're going through this. And I know this is a season of stretch for you, and you're working on this too. What are you looking at to help measure and grow and help your ministry feel like you have a direction?
Sure. Curriculum-wise, my denomination does a lot of good stuff. They arm us with kind of all centered around a national youth gathering we do with 30,000 kids at different places throughout the country every 3 years. And they kind of help frame a way of seeing your program as something that is treating that as an apex that you're working towards and coming back down from. Obviously, the thing there is you want to make sure that the kids take advantage of it, because if they don't, then, but I guess my point is the path that's on, curriculum and tool wise, I find relevant and helpful even without the gathering itself. So that's something that's a little insider. I guess, and I've told you I'm not reading enough right now with two small children. It's not happening. But a book I read recently, Evangelical, Sacramental, and Pentecostal, by Gordon Smith. Every Christian should read this book. He lays out questions that some of those defending the faith questions are what do we believe? Basic, really important doctrinal questions. He lays out, that's how he separates the church, which I think is an interesting way, because we divide denomination names, mainline, evangelical, Catholic, this and that, but his way of defining it's evangelical, sacramental, and Pentecostal, I thought was interesting. And he kind of lays out the way each three would respond to that question. And his conclusion is that for the church to truly be the church, we have to be all three. But I keep that book on my desk because the questions a lot of them are things that kids will ask even,
Yeah.
or just come up in regular ministry. And so I refer back to that to make sure that everything I'm doing is honoring my own tradition, but ultimately faithfully participating in the answering of Jesus's prayer of the church's unity, and then, mentoring. We called a new lead pastor about 1.5 years ago, Dave Bowman, and he and I actually grew up at Zion together, which is funny, and they kind of went away and we're back home. He's been a real resource to me, and so is our lead pastor before him was as well. Just knowing what I do well, knowing what I don't do well, and being able to kind of call me out on that, saying maybe in delegating is something I have a hard time doing because it's like delegating might immediately and seem like you might think, oh well, it's less work. But the truth is, from a leader, it is work to delegate.
It's like three times as much sometimes.
But it is worth it. And as you grow leaders that can take those pieces, because I've been in that situation where you're executing a program and it's like something happens. You talked about calling an audible, being able to have that person that you just look at and it's like without even speaking, they know like, okay, so I need to come in, swoop in here and save this or do this. It takes work to grow those people. But that's a resource that you absolutely need. So that's delegating is helpful. But like I said, mentorship, having somebody coaching you, guiding you, being able to kind of, and be a mirror too, help you understand your own vision and be asking yourself the questions you should be asking.
Yeah, we've found there's been a few for us. For sure, for me personally, I have kind of like a coach, a consultant, a friend of mine that meets with me, and all the questions and issues, like I as very structure oriented, I look at things and say, this wheel is broken, this wheel needs to be fixed, we need a grease over here. And oftentimes you look at the whole and say, wow, there's so much that needs to be fixed, but you don't usually have the first steps into it. Mm-hmm. And for me, what I've found is having somebody that can be that sounding board, that can look at me and say, so what I hear you saying is this, and then giving you the tools, whether it's actual like quarterly mapping strategies, whether it's actual measurements. The reasons why we call this place Grow, Kill, and Adapt is actually that's one of our metrics. We measure through, is this program successful? Should we continue to grow it? Do we have to kill it because it's not working at all? Or do we have to adapt it because we just missed the mark a little bit and we need to come back around to it? And so all of that stuff is kind of stemmed from the idea that we all need to be refined and continue to be refined. And there are plenty of great books out there. Jeannie Mayo has some stuff on how to actually connect to youth culture. There's plenty of places that you can get it. It's how you then implement it that's really important. And for me, through consulting, through having just those mentors and deeper relationships, that people that might not have even been in youth ministry, but can view things outside and then bring it in. That's a big deal for me. Yeah. So we got this next part right here. Okay. So youth builder. Mm-hmm. This is a chance where you get to share our DIY projects. Right. Uh-huh. And I wanted to kind of get your, what is something that you've seen built or you've built yourself that has impacted your ministry overall? You know, we always talk about toys, but I'm interested in growing out from there also. Right.
So, and this is something that, it's funny, and I made one myself. I'd seen other people make this, and it ended up being valuable for totally different reasons than I may have intended. Okay. All right, so this might freak some people out, but this is called a prayer labyrinth, which is like an ancient kind of like monastic practice.
Okay.
Like walking this path and praying as you do so. It's like a posture to help prayer. It's a prayer discipline and practice, and you can make ones. You just get some canvas and duct tape, and if you Google prayer labyrinth, you can get patterns. It takes some work, but you very cheap and easy. You can make one that's like huge and fills a whole room, and so that's what we did. I had seen one made somewhere else, and look, I set that thing out. You get a group of, we did it once at a camp retreat thing. You got like 50 kids in the room. You get this big thing, put some black lights on, some worship pads, and you tell them like, you guys are going to quietly, we're all going to be quiet, enter a time of prayer and reflection, and you're going to walk this path and pray as you feel led as you do so. And I bring it up because I was amazed at how well it worked. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I thought like, okay, that seems really kind of, I don't get that. That seems weird.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening is, you know, you hit this moment like where these kids are like laying hands on each other and crying, and just this intense, passionate moment of prayer that wasn't individual, because it's kind of designed to be an individual thing. It was this corporate experience with these kids. And I've seen it. And I have pulled it out and tried to use it before, and it hasn't worked. But it has worked a few times and recreated that moment. And that was cool because, like, that's just something that just happened. And again, there's some canvas, duct tape, Google Prayer Labyrinth, make a big one, couple cheap black lights, worship pads, you got it.
Yeah, try it out,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, so check out a Prayer Labyrinth. Give it a try. I'm like sitting there thinking logistically, oh my goodness, how is this going to work? How do I get 50 kids through this thing? But I'm sure I'm going to check it out now that you've put it on my plate. I know what Gaga Pit looks like. I don't know what a prayer labyrinth looks like. So, well, Ryan, we want to thank you so much for coming today and hanging out with us. Guys, we just want to take this moment to thank you for listening to us. Check out refugeyouth.network.org. And if you need some resources or maybe some tools, check underneath our resources tab. You can pull those off for free. We're just trying to love on you. We want to thank you. Thanks our sponsors today. So thanks Park Home for sponsoring us and Impact Productions. And don't forget to stay in your lane and that we love you. Have a good day.